When a disaster comes to the place where you are, you can either choose to flee or to stay and respond to it. I went to Liberia in the first place to serve the people of Liberia and West Africa. An Ebola outbreak didn't change that purpose. In fact, it emphasized it a little more.
We first heard about Ebola in Liberia in March.
I was actually at a picnic and somebody said, "Have you heard that there's an Ebola outbreak in Guinea and it's spread across the border to Liberia?"
One of our doctors was very concerned about the possibility of it coming to our mission hospital. She felt that we should prepare an isolation unit, not so much in case we had Ebola, but when we received an Ebola patient.
My choice to stay in Liberia and take care of patients with Ebola and help fight this outbreak is really a natural response. The day I found out that I had Ebola, it was a Saturday, it was July 26th.
It was on July 22nd, the last day I went to the isolation unit. Wasn't feeling really great, but it felt very much like malaria. So for the next 4 days, took malaria medication.
I was lying in my bed in my house where I had been quarantined, and Dr. Lance Plyler, who was the disaster response team leader for Samaritan's Purse, was standing outside my bedroom window. And Dr. John Fankhauser, one of my colleagues and friends who was caring for me, was in my room with me in full PPE. And Lance said, "Kent, bud, we have your test results, and I'm really sorry to tell you that it's positive for Ebola."
David came home, told me that Kent Brantly had Ebola, and that was really tough because Kent and Amber are not only colleagues, but they're good friends. And then David said, "And Nancy, you also have Ebola."
It was really a very surreal moment. It was a very solemn moment.
I remember David reaching out to comfort me, put his arms around me, and I just said, "Don't." And I knew how dangerous it was.
My first response was, okay, so what's next? What's our plan? How am I going to tell my wife? I felt a very strange but overwhelming sense of peace.
Obviously, when you get that kind of news, it's sobering and it's hard to hear. At that time, I was concerned about my family and what it would put them through for me to be sick. But I had a sense of calm that I knew I was doing what I was supposed to be doing.
I didn't know whether I would live. I didn't know whether I would die. But the Lord just gave me this sense of peace.
2 Americans, both infected with the deadly virus, are returning home to the U.S. Dr. Kent Brantly and Nancy Reipel.
The first time I heard the word Ebola, it was probably when they were doing all the coverage about Dr. Brantly and Nancy. And then when I heard it in Dallas, it was a couple hours before I was about to get Mr. Duncan as my patient.
An individual traveling from Liberia has been diagnosed with Ebola in the United States.
I was just feeling confused, shocked as to how it could have gotten here.
Thomas Eric Duncan, the first patient diagnosed with Ebola in the United States, is fighting for his life.
I was selected as part of the team. There was no question in my mind whether or not I would take care of the patient or not. There was a patient in my unit on my floor, and it was my job, my responsibility to take care of him.
It's part of who I am. Nursing is a calling. There was a patient that needed help. I did everything that the CDC and the hospital recommended of me, how to put on the personal protective equipment, how to take it off. I even interviewed with the CDC in the hospital after I took care of Mr. Duncan, and they deemed me no risk. So it was just a shock.
When I got the results back that I was positive for Ebola, I almost didn't hear it. It's kind of a blur.
My chief nursing officer, Cole Edmondson, and then a CDC doctor came in the room in their full protective equipment. I saw his eyes, and they had been red from crying, and I knew immediately. When he told me, my heart dropped, and it was just devastating news. It really was. Because Mr. Duncan had died 3 days prior, I think flashbacks started coming to my head of how his disease progressed, and eventually it led to his death.
Even after the last case of Ebola is finished, there's going to be a very broken and weak healthcare system that's going to need to be rebuilt.
Our concern and our great hope is that even though it's quieted down here, that we will not allow it to just not be addressed anymore.
We live in a global community. We need to recognize that people on the other side of the world, they are our neighbors, and we need to treat them with love and compassion and respect, just like we do the person who lives in the house next door to us.